I think we're gonna get started. Welcome to whitCon for this year. I'd like to start with a quick thank to everyone here in the room. A big thank you for coming, and also for the people online. Also want to mention that Curtis is not here this year. He had an eye surgery last week. Fortunately, he is recovering really fast and well, but that unfortunately didn't make him able to travel by airplane. So he's sending his regards and told us that he was excited to see you guys next year, and he'll save all the hard questions to then. So that'll be good to have him back next year. A few meeting logistics. We have 150-ish people registered for in person. We have around 300 registered for online. The people online will be muted, so it's not possible to talk. And the reason for that is that we're connected to the audio system here at the conference center. So if you have any questions, you need to use the Q&A kind of ask or chat option in Teams, and that will be facilitated by Mo to ask some questions in the Q&A sessions where we have time. We are also recording, and the parts of the recording that we have been allowed to distribute later will be distributed later. Some of the presentations will be live only, so it's not possible to watch the recording. So for the people online and for the people in the audience, make sure you pay attention to every single presentation. Then, so the most important question today, why are you guys here? You thought about that? Well, it's obviously to find out who will win darts at Fight Club tonight. Is it Lucas Martin or is it Rohit? And it's a battle of the century. Rohit, he won the 2 last years, so he might go for a third one, or Lucas might get him off the horse. So we'll see that tonight. But before we have fun, my mom always told me you have to do your homework before you can go out and play. So today we need to learn something. And together I have basically put together 4 different objectives for the group today. That's my main objectives for you. My first one is that after you've been here today, I want you to have learned at least one thing new. There will probably be many new things. The second thing is that I would like you to network. So in the breaks, we have specific breaks of half an hour in addition to the lunch breaks and the happy hours, etc., that we on purpose have put in so that you guys can connect, expand on your network, also talk to other companies in the same basin, etc. That's been a very important part of kind of our mission and what we've been trying to do here at Whitson over the few last years. It's also to meet us. So in us, I mean the Whitson folks in person, the people that you write support tickets to, the people who help you with bugs or feature updates and feature releases and what not, and not the least to have a lot of fun, which we will have both technically and socially later today. We will talk a lot about Whitson Plus, which is kind of a common denominator for a lot of the presentations today. If you've never heard about Whitson Plus before, it's a web-based solution for everything DCA and type loss, auto forecast, PVT, bottom of pressures, flow material balance and RTA, numerical simulation, nodal, and unconventional well tests. This week, and that was bad timing probably from my end, we actually managed to put the biggest release ever that we've done in Whitson Plus for this week. It's been rolled out to a few clients or this week, and then we will next week roll it out to everyone. So the release notes will be sent out over the weekend. But there's a ton of things in there, and we've always had pretty big releases, but this is by far the big one. And Mo will loop us through some of the new things in the software that we have released and that we're extremely excited about. Our mission and vision for the software since the beginning has been trying to create like a bridge between subsurface problems and production engineering problems. So everything that kind of naturally fits in that umbrella, we want to loop into the software. And we wrote the first line of code to the software a little bit more than 4 years ago, and we tried to focus on making it simple. Not only simple to use, but also simple for you guys to interface with us. So that means that it's one product that where you have all the current features and everything that we're releasing in the future. You get it for one price for unlimited number of seats. You get all the features in one interface for a seamless workflow, and you can access that through single sign-on on the web online. Also very important is a thing that we think is very important. Like 80 of you guys were here yesterday for the training. So software training and providing that complimentary is something that we take very seriously. And if you are working at the Whitson subscribing company, you can go to whitson.com/training, or you see it in the weekly newsletters that we send out with an overview of the training sessions we have. So they're deep dives in specific parts of the software, whether that's PVT, decline curve analysis, or whatever else. And yeah, we all love training. The absolute most important deliverable we have at Whitson is to have the best support in the industry. That's our goal. I'm sure we're not there, but that's where we want to be, and we want to continue to be there. And if you want to quantify it, on average, we have a less than 2 minutes response time on support tickets. But we also take it very seriously that the people that you talk to, that you guys know them personally. You know me, you know Mo, you know Teja, Graham, all the developers that's here today. And that's on purpose. We want it to be a very intimate type of experience for you guys. So at Whitson, we have this joke that we like to do business belly to belly. And that's we want to make it very, very familiar and hopefully friendly in that interaction as well. So if you want to know, okay, who here today is actually representing Whitson, these are the people here that you can look for. All of them are wearing a bow tie or like a blue type of color to be, it's easier to recognize if so. And if you need any help, please test the support desk on the back there with a support ticket, and we can see if it still holds. We're also very happy that we managed the last quarter. We actually got to more than 100 companies subscribing to the software. It's something we're extremely happy about, and we feel really honored and blessed to do that. But with that, there's a lot of obligation on our shoulders, and we have a few promises back to you guys that we would like to uphold from now going forward as well. And we like to break that into 4 different buckets. But the main bucket is like we need to double down on support and training. That has been a very important part of us. That is essentially our marketing. We don't really have an outgoing marketing or sales team or anything like that. So we've just tried to make sure we have happy users and get kind of new relationships through word of mouth. So doubling down on support and training has been extremely important for us. Then a huge headache in the oil and gas industry is connecting to different data sources and especially other tools and whatnot. So we put a huge effort this year into making something called Whitson Connect, which is a Python library that you can literally automate a lot of things in the software with. A lot of you guys use that for automatically uploading daily production data, calculating bottom pressures, pulling data back out of Whitson, etc. And you can do that through either Snowflake or the API. And we need to continue making all of those interfaces better. That doesn't only include the things on the back end, machine to machine, but also front end. So now we've probably added 10 new different interfaces this year that you can upload forecasts from Aries, Mosaic, all the Canadian like GeoScout, etc. up there in Canada. But I'm sure there's a lot more testing and test sets we need to push through those systems before they become perfect. But those are the 2 main things we would like to focus on. And then the third thing is that when it comes to the functionality we're putting into the software, we try to always go to like a broader user group. So we started with only PVT parts in the software, and then we added on stuff that related to kind of RTA, bottom pressures. And now our next big push is on DCA, type well, and auto forecast. And we want to make that extremely perfect within the next year and have and support all the bells and whistles there and be able to import and export very seamlessly from all the economic softwares out there. The last thing I can promise you is that we will do that with a sense of urgency, and we know how it is for you guys a lot of times in a hectic day to day. Sometimes you don't have the time to go through a full course before you need to ask for someone for help. So we're there to help you, and please view us more as a partner than just a software provider going forward. So over to the program today. This is the highlights. We're going to do a technical program. Again, we need to learn something and to do our homework before we can go out and play. And then after that, we're just going to walk. It's literally 50 feet outside of this window right here. I'm going to walk over to Yard House for a quick happy hour. And then for those of you who would like to join us to Flight Club and do darts, there's going to be a bus here that's going to take everybody from this venue to Flight Club, and that goes at 6 sharp. And then we have a part of Flight Club from 7 to 10 actually. It's a little bit outdated, this slide, for those who would like to see Rohit beat Lucas. I'm going to go through the highlight or through the different sessions. We're going to start with Craig after this. I'm going to introduce him there, and he's going to talk about something called augmented drainage development. And it has a lot of, I think, implicit learnings for this crowd. Then we're going to have a type curve, or sorry, I meant type wells type of session with Kimberly, James, and David Fulford. We're going to go throughout the day with a session on how to improve your production, both from a kind of a production nodal perspective, but also economically. We're going to talk about well performance and how you operationalize that in your day-to-day work. We're going to have a little bit of a PVT-related session mixed with some new features of Whitson Plus before. Also, this is after lunch. We're going to talk about day-to-day use cases of RTA, and then at the very end, we're going to have 3 different interpreters showing them their interpretation of a data set for both type wells and one for RTA. And then before, we're going to give out the Fetkovich Technology Award, our good friend Dave Anderson, and one of my role models is going to produce or present a little presentation on the history of RTA, and that's going to be a perfect precursor before. Actually, our friend Elliot Huff is going to introduce Eddie, who's going to present this year's winner of the Fetkovich Technology Award. At the very end, hopefully, we'll have some nice jokes from the panelists in this picture right here, but we're going to talk about a very important thing when it comes to RTA that is probably under-communicated and under-discussed a little bit, and that's this part of mental models. And, when you do RTA, you already almost have to have decided on a mental model before you do a lot of the work. So that's going to be a very exciting way to end the day today. So with that, I want to just introduce Craig Sapola from Hess. He's going to be the first presenter out with some more. In the next session, we are lucky to have Kimberly is going to do the first presentation. She has been flying in from Pittsburgh, and she's going to talk about how their company is dealing with both organizing and creating type wells for their clients. So with that, Kimberly.
Hello, everyone. From the lovely fall in the Northeast, come back to the heat. It was quite a shock yesterday when I got off the plane. So as the Whitson team introduced me, I am in Pittsburgh, and I founded my small consultancy in 2017. We're a team of production and reservoir engineers, and we are specialized in the Appalachian Basin. So my experience is coming from assisting small and medium-sized operators that have both conventional and unconventional assets. So we do some fun things with type wells. We apply it to conventional assets with some guardrails. And the Whitson team asked me to kind of start this off with a basic workflow. They like our organization. They like how we deal with the wells and slice and dice our information. So providing a basic workflow for you guys today so that the upcoming presentations can dive into the details. Okay, so let's start with the goals when we're developing a type well. We want them to be representative, reliable, and refined. When I say representative, this means you need to be very careful about your analogy set, and you can use the tools in Whitson to do that. So you want to represent your vintage, your completion, the geology, maybe the operator, maybe some other consideration. And one thing I always like to tell my team and my clients are, is your type well representing what happened in the past? You want to know what's going on in the area to compare historical production to on an average? Or are you trying to predict what's happening in the future? Be very careful about the wells you're pulling into your analogy set, depending on that representation you're trying to do. Be reliable. So you want a tight confidence range. I think we can do that in Whitson with all of the probabilities that we have. You want repeatable results. I want my engineers and my clients to be able to replicate the data. I can export it quickly to them. I can show my work very easily. And you want it functional across your tools. So most of us are going to be taking those type wells into an economic software. Is that easy? Does it repeat? Can you validate that data? And then I like to call the last step is be refined. We want to quickly produce these so that our finance teams can use the data. We don't want to get stuck in the engineering loop a lot of times. It needs to be easy to explain and visually understandable. And we found that that's a super fun thing for us here in Whitson. So our quick workflow, this is very basic. I'm sure all of you know this, but you want to be careful about your project setup so that you can use it in the future and your other engineers can repeat it. You want to then, we like to do our auto forecast DCA. I'll touch on that. Then I like to do the third step, which is your data exploration. Really spend time here, understand your set and your objectives, and then assign your parameters and iterate. All right, this is just the landing screen on Whitson, and the way I like to organize it is that each field or client has their own project, or sorry, their own field, and then they have their sub-projects in their area. If I were an operator, I would set this up in a very similar way. I would probably have a project for every reservoir I'm targeting. In my experience, the Utica is not talking to the Marcellus in the Northeast, so clients have their Utica database, their Marcellus database. Any project that's going to have similar type curves that I would want to compare, I'd put in the same project and then keep everything separate so I can control my access and the teams that are dealing with that data. And then I like to jump in and auto forecast DCA. Now, I prefer to leave my parameters in auto forecast DCA very open in this step. I don't really restrict it at all. I want to see what the software is predicting because this is not about forecasting production for me at this point. It's just getting a data point quickly. We can refine it later. I also like to pull out a lot of these parameters and then do a histogram plot to do a parameterization comparison with my type curve later. So see where my average B factor is landing, etc. All right, and then my favorite step is the data exploration, I like to call it. I break this into two pieces. I want to explore the composition and then I want to explore various normalization methods. So first off, when I imported my data, brought my project in, I made sure I group things. So I do a lot of custom parameters, make sure we have our operators in there, different buckets of completion types and designs, vintage bucketing, and I like to just sit in this main plot here and colorize it. Filter own groups, just get really familiar with the data and see what might be controlling the performance. I like to keep my well count on there, and then I like to turn on, turn off my appended DCA. See how good that forecast was. Maybe at this point I go back and fix some key wells DCA if I don't like the auto fit. I always am flipping between rate and cum to see where our P50 and our average are in relationship to the production. So that kind of gives me a sense of the data. It helps me narrow down what my well set is. I need to make sure that my well set, again, is meeting those objectives of, am I mirroring the past? Am I trying to forecast the future? Am I representative of the geographic area I've been asked to evaluate? All right, and then we go to normalization. I love how I can just click a whole bunch of buttons here in Whitson. I can do on completion, length, etc. Sometimes we'll build in some custom when I'm doing vertical wells, maybe thickness of the zone. We do a lot of fun normalization. You got your averaging method, and then you've got your x-axis. One of the things we deal a lot with in the Northeast are some pretty strong gas wells. Most of them come on constrained, so we always talk to our clients about how are we going to operate this well. Are you going to crack it wide open? Can your production equipment handle it? Or do we need to build a type curve that allows for a constrained period? This right here is a Utica well. Sometimes we see over 9 months of constrained gas flow that can really change a lot of your parameters. So make sure you're taking that into consideration. I love that I can flip that back and forth very carefully and quickly. All right. And then to the fun part. Yeah, wouldn't have guessed that. Interesting. I'll stand closer. All right, now to our curve parameters. First thing I like to do when I jump into the curve parameters, decide what you're fitting on. In my case, I'm just going to do this. So you need to decide, again, what is your objective on your type curve? Are you looking for high side case, low side case, average P50? Most of the time with my clients, we're looking at a P50 curve. And then I just like to jump in, click the auto fit, see what happens. I like to then do what I call the lock and iterate process. This is a little bit of my technique. The Whitson team has commented on this funny. I go really fast. I'll lock a parameter, click auto fit, go again, drop back in and see how it compares to the actual production. I typically like to lock in my initial rate first. I tend to look at initial rates with the pivot plot, maybe a surface facility restraint my client has if it's a high producing gas well, and we really like to go in and look at that initial rate as the most important point in our type curves, lock that in, then ask it to auto fit again. Same with the B factor. Some places, if I'm really familiar with the area, so you guys may have very strong opinions about your B factor and lock that in first, but I really like that I can lock these parameters quickly, click, 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 and get to a type curve. Again, I'm trying to be very efficient and get an answer to the clients. And you can do that with all of the parameters. And then my validation step is I like to work backwards. So I like to go from the DCA menu with my settings, save my curve, go back to settings, turn it on, then go back into wells, compare it in all the different views, cumulative rate, all of the time, x-axis normalizations, and then I'll go back and try again. So it's a very iterative step, but I think, it comes back to we have a repeatable, reliable product at the end. I'm not just sitting in DCA matching one P50 cumulative curve. We're going back into wells, and then a lot of times I like to turn on a larger well set, do some different colorizations again, kind of repeat that data exploration set so that I can really have confidence in the type well parameters that I selected. All right, and then Matthias added in this lovely demo here to show you what happened in the software. You'll notice some new features that I'm super excited about. So we already went through, here's the DCA. Saw some new things there. He's in the AutoFit DCA here. Get our spread of parameters, saving it, jumping into the type well project, selecting his well set. And here's the data exploration step that I mentioned. Again, I love being able to color all of the things, do all of the normalizations that I need to do to represent the well set. A little exploration of the pivot plot. We've got our appended DCA here, some colors going on. And now we are doing some parameter selection, fitting and saving. And I see some new features here too. So pretty excited to get this new release soon. Lovely. Well, there is your basic overview of the type well workflow that our team likes to do. My contact information's up there. Plenty more to talk about on your analogy set selection, your normalization, lateral link degradation, all of that. But this will get you started and give you some considerations when diving into your data. Thanks, guys. Yeah, straightforward.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that so much. This was a good run through. I can take this a step further, where we're going to include pressure in type wells, and that's something we see more and more with our clients, actually. And I think the first time I discussed it with anyone, it was with the next presenter, James Tucker, and he's going to talk about using pressure normalized type wells. I think in the program, the title is "He Pressured Me to Do It," but we'll see how this goes. But it's basically following up on a lot of the concepts that Kimberly was talking about. But how can we include pressure in that exercise, especially in these high unconventional wells? So with that, the stage is yours. That work for you?
Thank you. All right. Well, my slides aren't nearly as aesthetically pleasing as Kimberly's, but hopefully get to the point here. So kind of to touch on the reason for doing pressure normalized type wells. Oftentimes, I think engineers are pressured to make a type well or to do the workflow that Kimberly discussed under some constraints that limit their accuracy in doing so. So a lot of the application of doing this has been covered over the last decade with folks that are in the audience today. But the main ones where this is quite useful is in high pressure, high rate, constrained wells that have variable operating conditions, and then newer wells, or wells that have a lack of production history, where we can accurately apply DCA. So that's been done at a forecasting level, and our observation is the same benefits can then be applied to the type wells. So with that, we'll just walk through our setup, how we pull in all the data. We'll give a quick background on the Uinta Basin, and then we'll get into a short workflow on building a type well there. So I think we covered this a little bit to start, but Nothing, I would say, unique here. This is just our workflow in pulling all the data into our internal tool, rely on Whitson to calculate our bottom hole flowing pressures, and then it's exported back out for the time being, and then aggregated and forecasted in our tools. So I think that's the key point, that with all of this being automated, it's really efficient and much easier to do this on a lot of wells, and I think that's where it becomes pretty powerful when you're also doing type wells using DCA. Okay, so for those that aren't familiar, we'll just do a quick overview with the Uinta Basin here. So it's a lacustrine environment, which is a lake setting. It's an overpressured reservoir, generally from 0.6 to 0.8 psi per foot. It's a black oil. What's unique about this black oil is it's a waxy crude. And then there's a lot of multi-bench development going on within the basin. So you take those plus what we would call some uniquely contrasting reservoirs. A lot of these targets are sandwiched between shales and more conventional targets, and it sets up pretty well for maybe a use case with PNR type wells. Then you look at the activity in the basin. The last few years has been pretty phenomenal. You can see that we've really doubled, I think, well count in the last 3 years or so. Testing up to maybe 6, 7 different benches with more to come. So that's also, we've got a lot of wells. We've got a lot of wells that don't have a lot of data, and a lot of wells that we don't understand as well. Again, a great use case for using pressure normalized rates here. And then on the bottom left plot here, we just got a typical pressure profile for a well in the basin, and you can see it takes almost a year to reach stabilized pressure on this well. And so setting up again well for, we want to get as accurate as we can, as soon as we can with our forecasts and our underlying type curves. Last comment here is with the contrasting reservoirs and some of these things that we're seeing subsurface, we also see these long transitional flow periods, which again just make it difficult for us to feel confident about our decline curve analysis, not having 2-3 years of data. Okay, so before we get into type wells, we always start at a well level, and so we're going to touch on a quick forecasting workflow that we have here and how we think about this. This is just a standard template. We've got just a rate plot. I don't know if this has a laser. Just production plot here, becoming familiar with the well, and then we've got our PNR plot, barrel per day per PSI versus cumulative oil, and it's a little bit light here, but you can see we've got a full production history here, and then we've selected a subset of data. And I think this is where it starts becoming kind of powerful with how we view it, is when we select the data here, we can also visualize what portion of the data we're selecting in some of these other diagnostic tools. So within this pressure plot, we can see, are we selecting data when the well is still being drawn down, has GOR broken out, are there any variable like operating conditions that may influence this pick later on? And then we can also get a sense for, this line here is our reservoir pressure. You can certainly add saturation pressure into that, and you're understanding what segment of data am I picking and what are the implications of that. And then what we like to do, and I think Kimberly touched on this well, is to have a fairly iterative process. So we'll select the data in our pressure normalized forecast, and then we'll forecast the data in a rate cum or a rate time plot as well. And this is just I think a fairly simple example showing, had we selected this data really early on and tried to forecast it using DCA, we likely would have overestimated where this well would have landed. But if we lean on, I think, the PNR forecast to inform those decline curves, we actually can see we can get a fairly accurate pick very early in the life of the well. And so that's really where we're informing this other forecast here. So just a simple setup here. And I'll work through this, I think, quickly because it was described well by Kimberly, but again, I think the visual power and the ability to normalize these rates by pressure is really where, when we're thinking about our well sets, you can start seeing some interesting trends spatially, and you're able to account for some of the things that may change in your different type curve areas as you move around the field. So in this case, we've got a selection of wells here. This is north, this is south, and you can see that as we're moving north, there's something uniquely changing about this subset of wells. And this is going to help us refine our type curve areas, where we land on. But it's also interesting to see that this gives you maybe a little bit more insight when we're looking at the shape of our PNR plot relative to just a performance on a rate Q time, or a rate time. So again, this is helping us construct our type curve area and refine the underlying type wells. And then we can move to the more conventional or traditional method of building a type well with different distributions. So here we have the same subset of data now. These wells have been selected, and we've got our ranges are P90, or sorry, P10, P50, and P90. And the same set of data here highlighted on our rate Q plot. Fairly straightforward, but let's now take that to applying a forecast. So then we'll apply a straight line fit to our P50 data set. And you can see, again, the value of doing this is that we can do this fairly early on, or incorporate more wells that have less data and feel confident that we're going to be able to get a more accurate EUR. Oops, excuse me. So again, this is a P50 of the underlying wells. You can see we've got well count here. And in this example, we're able to, again, get a fairly stabilized trend early on, which gives us some confidence in our EUR. And I've just got the same set of selected points here highlighted on our rate Q plot to just, again, emphasize, the benefits is that this is quite complementary to helping us land on our EUR. And then the other thing that we found is, with all of the activity in the basin, and there's been different transactions and things that have happened, a lot of the wells that we've inherited, we have very different operating conditions. So we've changed artificial lift types, or we've changed the drawdown profile. And I think a lesson learned for us over the last few years has just been, obviously, when you aggregate those into like a rate Q or rate time plot, you have to be careful on the shape and the underlying profile of those wells. And what PNR does a nice job of is it accounts for all that. So again, we can talk through maybe the different situations we have on how we want to model a type curve from a rate time or rate Q basis based on our system constraints or what IPs we want to achieve. But we can feel pretty confident that we're not going to necessarily overestimate on the EUR when we use our PNR forecast. All right, so let's just recap a little bit here. I think our views are the fundamentals still apply. So really, I didn't touch on this, but I think it's pretty critical that, obviously having accurate bottom hole pressure data is going to underpin the entire analysis. Some of the other things that certainly impacted as well is our initial reservoir picks and what we assume to be our oil per PSI cutoffs that we apply to come up with our EURs. And we didn't show it here, but we apply a lot of the traditional diagnostic tools you find in Whitson and that have been touched on in the past to also, as you think about the selection of those data points and understanding flow regimes and where we're at, again, the power of that, I think, is visually. You can just see what segment of the data you're fitting. And then I have a comment here on being just beware of bias. We'll touch a little bit on opportunities to improve this workflow, and I think where it could head. But with anything, this is subject to bias in the analyst, and so I think we'll caution folks there. We have an example here that I wanted to show as just, again, some of the, observations that we've had and some learnings when we're doing this. You can see we had just, lamented the benefits of using this to predict early time, but we've also seen a few cases here or there where the shape of the PNR well or the type wells changes through time. And so if we had picked an early estimate here, we may have under-predicted the later estimate here. And the mental model that we're having between these two things is, first, I always go back to, is the underlying data correct? And we know that we have had some issues as we've moved to gas lift and getting the correct bottom hole flowing pressures. There's a lot of friction in these wells. They don't make a lot of gas. So we've considered that, but I think more interestingly, more we lean to on some of these is just, and this is the power I feel in using a tool like this, is these wells, again, are in a system where you're landing in a conventional target and it's sandwiched between really high-quality shales. And so our mental model here might be, in this specific well, the upfront productivity and maybe the upfront reservoir quality wasn't as good as some of the other wells that we had shown earlier. But late time, we're seeing some contribution from maybe like a lower permeability system. So I think the power well is pretty obvious, but there's also a cautionary tale there to continue to do the work. Hold up. Well, we'll say that we find that DCA is still the preferred method by most engineers and auditors, but PNR is certainly complementary, and hope you all see that. Even if we're not using it for like a reserves basis, I think most of y'all would agree that there's a strong use case here for development planning and optimization. I think some future work and applications that we see. One, understanding these slopes through time. So I think of that more of like a reservoir surveillance. Like, can we benchmark ourselves through time and make that an efficient and automated process? Similarly, can we remove some of the human bias by doing auto picks? Think so. And then outlier detection. So I would say that like both on the front end and on the back end of this, we could refine outlier detection that may make these results a little bit more inaccurate, or provide insight like this example on which wells may be different. I know that Oxy's doing some similar work, so this is just a note on where we stand with the team here at Whitson. Been talking about this for about 6 to 9 months with them, and I believe they're going to bring some of these workflows into their software here later this year. With that, we'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity presenting today. We'd like to thank the reservoir team and IT teams at Crescent for their contribution to this work. Conduit has been a great partner for us in helping build out these internal tools and pulling in and aggregating the data. And then we'd like to thank my teammate Tyler Coates, who's here and helped develop this tool internally and progress a lot of our technical workflows that you see here today. So with that, I guess questions, or we can move on to David.
Thank you for a great presentation. One of the challenges I found, at least, with using pressure normalized rates on empirical forecasts is you eventually have to translate it back into decline curve, hyperbolic, whatever, for running economics. So one of the things that's useful for that is we think of pressure normalized rate, it's really unit pressure drop rate, right, per 1 PSI. We can make anything we want, and you could do what I would call pressure corrected rates, which would put it at the ultimate flowing pressure of the well. And you plot both, and you can see the point in time where the actual pressure profile converges to that final flowing pressure, and it tells you at which point you can take that pressure corrected forecast and just use that going forward. And the beginning of time can just be calibrated to fit whatever the empirically derived behavior is. Early time, another thing we can do is we think about fractional flow or total liquid. You can actually do a correction to oil cut. You're going to be having an increasing oil cut at early time. So go ahead and correct that to what your final oil cut is expected to be. You can do the same thing there. And you can look at when that begins to stabilize, and you should have a valid forecast going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Can you hear me? There it is. Hey, James, not sure if you remember me. John Dwyer, Devon Energy. It's been a while. Great presentation. Thank you for showing off the methodology. I was curious to get your thoughts on multi-phase flow effects, particularly, when you drop below bubble point, or is the you into kind of more of a black oil, vol oil play where you don't have to worry about that as much?
Yeah, by and large, it's black oil, and so we don't have to worry about it, and it makes a great, simple use case. What I will say is some of the other zones have mobile water or higher water cuts, so there may be some multi-phase flow on the water side. We haven't, I would say, expanded on that yet. So that's kind of phase 2 of where we want to take this. So
Thank you.
hopefully that answers your question.
Perfectly.
Thank you.
Very good. We're going to end this type curve centric or type well centric discussion with my very good friend David Filford, who changed the title of the presentation to something a little bit more suitable for this crowd.
It's a little more fun. Thank you. So as you can tell from my slide, this is a paper I wrote for ERTEC and presented there, as well as the Whitson webinar a little earlier, a month or two ago. I'm going to go through this somewhat fast for time. Obviously, there's a full paper, and you're always welcome to email me, ask comments, or if you are connected with me on LinkedIn, you know I'm not shy from technical debates there. So, all right, so type profiles, of course, the new name for what we refer to type curves as being the reservoir engineering, dimensionless solutions. When we think about type profiles, why we distinguish them is because they are an empirical construct, and we're intended to characterize the typical well performance of a population of wells. However, there's no rigorous basis for the industry standard method of construction. They're obviously empirically verified when we drill wells and see the results, but there's no first principles basis for how we're developing these. So how do we really learn to do this? Well, it really comes by knowledge, by tradition. Right? We've learned a workflow out of respective companies that have taught us how to make reasonably accurate predictions of new well performance with empirical models. Or we can put this in Dune terms here. An old dude taught a young dude the weirding way. You Dune fans. So is this a good typo profile on the right here? There's a lot of wells. We have 3,000 plus days on production. The well count is really stable, and generally there's not a huge amount of variance or volatility in the production data. Right, and so how does one judge this? I described some attributes of it, but how do you tell whether that type well fitted to that arithmetic mean is the correct type well? Is that reasonably accurate to predict something that will come next? Well, is this even really a valid diagnostic? Have you seen anyone prove that if you fit a curve to the average, excuse me, you will get a reasonable prediction or a reasonable characterization of a population of wells? So has anyone ever validated this? Have you ever seen any technical presentation or literature that's shown that this is a valid diagnostic? Well, if none of that's true, what could go wrong? And the answer is everything. We can create an over forecast. We can drill wells where we'd otherwise expect to lose money, right, and destroy capital and take it away from opportunities that otherwise would have been reasonably good investments. So let's go back to basics here and talk about what is an average, and does it really mean the same thing as typical? Well, in some cases, no. We all know the average of ratios is not the same as the ratio of averages. Similarly, the integral of the average of derivatives is not the same as the average of integrals, which is to say that the EUR of average rates is not the same as the average EUR. So the problem is pretty simple. The average of two exponential functions is not an exponential function. Similarly for power functions, similarly for hyperbolic functions. And the simplest example we can construct of this is to just show that to you. If I average two exponential functions, I get something that is not exponential. I have B parameters posted here, but don't really worry about that. Just think of B parameter as a description of curvature. B is a second derivative, right? Our derivatives go slope and then curvature. So in the exponential case, we get something that has curvature where the two individual wells did not. And on the hyperbolic case, we get something that has curvature much like the highest values included in the average, because arithmetic means are biased towards high outliers. And when we extrapolate this forward, we see the issue with fitting decline curves to averages. We tend to overpredict, right? As the time goes on, the behavior of that function is not constant curvature, and it tends to be higher curvature at early time, leading to what I would say is the cause of many of over predictions of new well forecasts over the past 10 years, particularly in the mid-aughts. So we can summarize this as saying the behavior is clearly dominated by the larger value.
Here we have two exponents as a sum of or average of exponential functions. And we can see when one of those gets large, the slope of this plane does not change very much, right? That high value is dominating the value of the sum. So we know this isn't right. And interestingly, the feature of averages is used to good effect by reservoir engineers in other contexts. We have layered no cross-flow decline behavior by Fetkovich et al. The diffusivity equation solution for a linear reservoir, the common Rottenberger type curve, that's a sum of exponential functions. Fracture heterogeneity, thinking a superposition of individual fracture stages as solutions to that Rottenberger solution. The transient hyperbolic model we published in 2013, and recently fractal RTA. And then we can also have flow regime in composite reservoirs. Chris Clarkson, who's here with us, has used this as a superposition to model composite reservoirs using analytic models, and I did something similar with empirical models. So it's clear that sums and averages are useful to model complex reservoir behaviors, but this complex behavior shows up even when we don't want it, such as when we're creating tidal profiles. So the average of production data does not actually look like any constituent well. It's just purely statistical description. And this would be a non-issue if that's what we wanted, but that's not what we're trying to do with it. We're using them to characterize a typical well's behavior and economic value. And since investment decisions are made on the basis of the present value and capital efficiency of cash flows predicted by that, we should strive to create a type of profile that actually represents a typical well. So if a production forecast is a parametric characterization of that well's production history, meaning the decline curve describes the production, why don't we just use those? We can construct a linear model to predict EUR given the decline parameters. And this is not real math here, it's just a representation of what we're doing, right? If we're saying EUR is some function, empirical decline curve of decline parameters, instead let's say EUR is a linear combination of those parameters. Now generally this model is not heteroscedastic, which means not constant variance, because the distribution of each parameter is not symmetrical. But we can do some statistics, some transforms to make it so. The Box-Cox transform is a very common transform in statistics. It's in any basic statistics package you'll use. And this serves our purpose. It's very simple. We have an exponent. When that's zero, we take a log transform. Otherwise, it's a power transform. When we inspect the definitions of dimensionless rate and dimensionless time, we find out they're primarily a product of multiple parameters. So in this case, what we expect is a log normal distribution of those parameters. Nominal decline for transient linear flow is equal to 1/2 divided by time. We can derive that simply from a parallel model. So we also expect a log normal distribution. I put here usually because in empirical models, this is an empirically derived thing that captures all the early time cleanup effects that we just talked about. So it's usually log normal. Sometimes it might be a very, very small exponent. When we do this, you see my charts, yeah. On the left is what happens when you build a linear model without making those parameters symmetrical. On the right is after we do that. We perform a power transform, and we can build a linear model predicting EUR as a function of those parameters. And I'm not a huge proponent of R squared, but in this case, when you have a value of 0.99, it's pretty good. So we have a valid model. So what? Well, being linear means the property of a function being compatible with addition and scaling, which is to say the superposition property. And if you're not familiar with the definition of what that means, for all linear systems, the net response caused by two or more inputs is simply the sum of the responses caused by each input individually. So in a linear differential equation, we can construct a solution from the scaling and addition of any other solutions. Our good friend Braden Bowie knows this very well, and is one of the things that kind of was investigated as he's developing his numerical RTA. In practical use, this is used for rate and or pressure normalization. That is to say, RTA and PTA is based upon this idea. So we're doing something much simpler. We're averaging each parameter to predict EUR. And after averaging, we back transform the parameters, which in our case, because we took the log of each of these parameters, we average them and then we just exponentiate them back. So here are the results. Here I have a log probit distribution of EUR 30, which is, for me, that is 30 year cumulative production. and I have this very clearly called out what is and is not the P50. So we have an arithmetic mean, we have a geometric mean in red, and then we have a P50, and then we have the type well that has been not fit, not empirically calibrated, it has been calculated, has been computed from the decline curves of the individual wells. We see that falls very close to the P50 or the median of this distribution. We put that onto our time rate profiles. We can start to see a few more interesting features here. Obviously, when we look past about 1,000 days, we find that the arithmetic mean is too high, right? It's going to create a biased type well if you were to fit a decline curve to it. We're very close to the median, and the geometric mean has some interesting features. And we start to see when the data has low variance, all those averages are very close. When the data has a lot of variance, they start to diverge. And so it starts to become something where we can judge certain portions in history about the stability and whether we should be fitting our curve to those portions or not. And you probably didn't catch this, so I went through this quick. But obviously these are different. On the left is a fit to the arithmetic mean. On the right is the type well we calculated. And it's about 9% greater EUR on the left, which would be enough to change the rate of return of a new drill cash flow from maybe 15 to 25% rate of return, which might pass your corporate criteria for drilling that well, even though you really should expect that well to lose you money, given all your corporate G&A and overhead and everything that makes up that hurdle rate. And if you're a sell-side engineer, who I see their work every day, what could you do with this, right? You can continue to push this up. So the result here is that the arithmetic mean is a highly biased by outliers. It is not reliable to use as a basis for a type of profile, nor by itself as a diagnostic. We have the geometric mean, which is less biased by outliers, but susceptible to skewness in low values. The P50 represents the least biased representation as is wholly unaffected by values, only ordering. So we're going to propose a new diagnostic where we have the deviation of these means from the P50 indicates data stability issues, and stable periods of history should be relied upon more than unstable periods of history. So this is being implemented in Whitson. Matthias put this in here, and we can toggle these on or off, which will help assist you in terms of diagnosing your data set as you build your type of profiles. So I'm not going to skip over this discussion. You can read it for yourself. But with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions if we have time.
I'll go first with a very hard one. Now, I just saw like that your typo profile doesn't have like a build-up period in the beginning versus like the data set. Can you elaborate on that?
Sorry, I'm not referring to.
Yeah, if you just go back to the type well profile. Yeah, here. So you see the blue curve you have? It just declines from day one in this chart.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just elaborate, just explain to people why that's the case, and if you wanted to account for like a build-up, like you kind of see in the averages and whatnot there, what you would do to do that?
Okay, so this is a philosophical question for me. Do we normalize data to initial production time or peak time? And I would say, well, the reservoir doesn't know the difference. The reservoir sees initial time it starts producing, right? So I do my decline curves from initial production, not peak. And then build up is a replacement of those early time values. So I would do with this is I would delete the first 2 or 3 months of production and then stitch on a build-up curve that's calibrated to the Q time of these wells, because that's really where the value that we care about modeling is. It's the volumes we get, not necessarily the rates. So that would be my workflow. I hope that answers the question.
Dave, Andreas from Chevron, thanks for sharing. Very good workflow. Good question though, if you, regardless if you use your metric arithmetic mean or P50 on your time slicing, you might, if you only look at that section, you might end up with a well that really doesn't represent any of the wells that we're seeing in the basin. It's just kind of a pseudo well. Are you doing it this way, or are you first getting your P50 or your metric mean into the EUR space and then ensuring that your what you're coming with just matches that number as well?
Yeah, so I'm really showing two things here. One is how we build the type wells, and one is showing the spaghetti plot, I like to call it, as a diagnostic of that. Yeah, so with the point here is to say, well, you shouldn't just fit a curve to any average, really. You should forecast every well. right? But how do we validate that? Well, we validate it by using this as a diagnostic. And so in my case, I have a forecast for every single well, and you can see that's what the green lines here are. And then we use the parameters of those forecasts to compute the type well. And that is what you see here in the blue. That's the computed type well, right? And then we use this plot as a diagnostic to validate whether that has accurately captured the decline behavior of the analog well set.
Thank you. Is it off? No. Yeah, so for the people online, we're taking a short break and we'll be back in 20 minutes. On again. So now the people online will hear us again, and I'm going to mute myself. I think you can stand and roll. The presentation.
All right. Well, a couple of years ago, I moved into my new home, and I have to admit, the only reason I bought it was because of the garage. Anyone else here spend too much time in their garage? Garage. Yeah. Garage. No, I mean, the garage was big, but it was really unfinished, so there was no insulation, no heater, nothing. So being a little bit of an over planner with some things, I used Excel. You know, every cell is a 1 square foot. And, you know, I've got my theoretical car lift, my tool benches. I even had an electric winch planned on the ceiling to pick up my snowmobile because I'm from Canada. And apparently you can make some other lines in Excel too. So, you know, I spent way too much time thinking this out, but it pretty much turned out like I wanted to. So now in Canada, you have to have a heater in your garage. Otherwise your beer will freeze, and that's not a joke. So I got this high efficiency gas heater, but what I found out after about a year is that my heating bill, it was really high. Even though I had this high efficiency heater, it was doing its job in the winter, but in the spring and fall and summer, it kept kicking on and off, and I really didn't need it. So that's where it was costing me money. So it was a simple fix. I just turn off the heater in the spring until the fall, and I'm saving money. So, you know, my point is sometimes technology, like a heater, it can be helping us, but without monitoring us, it can end up costing us when it's not needed. So, you know, imagine us as engineers, we're responsible for well performance. If we could have simple opportunities like this to maybe turn something off like that, just as easy to improve our well performance. So, you know, the theme for this is help improve my production. So this nodal analysis part of Whitson, it's been available for about a year. And in that time, we've been doing lots of training courses. And the best opportunities I have are when I get to use your data to help you train a course. And that's when I learn a lot. So we're going to talk about some of those key findings. My name's Graham Helfrich. So for injecting gas lift, this is a case study we're going to look at that came from a course. And let's check it out. So this well started about 800 barrels a day, and then now it's down after about 2 years to 200 barrels a day. Lots of gas, and we're down to about 2 million cubic feet a day now, and the initial GOR 5,000 up to 7,000 now. So pretty gassy well. Now they also had this well on gas lift, a lot of gas lift. 1 million a day, and most recently 700,000. So, you know, it seems like a lot, but we'll check this out. So, gas lift valves, we are able to input our valve depths, our valve open and close pressures, and this is used to help estimate which valve is open through the well's history for gas lift. You notice that there's 2 configurations. So initially they had some valves, and then later they replaced them, hoping to get a bit deeper with their injection. Now we can actually estimate that initially the injection depth was about 1,400. Can you hear it still? Yeah, okay. About 1,400 feet for injecting gas lift. And then later, after they switched the valves out, we could get a little bit deeper. So that's a little bit of history how gas lift was being injected. So as we've been teaching production engineers in Whitson, we found that they really like the flowing material balance. Why? Because they can estimate the current reservoir pressure. Okay, this is needed when we do an IPR curve. And for this particular well, we were lucky that there was a bit of a buildup here that helped guide how big we needed to make the tank and honor that. So that was helpful. On the IPR curve, this is the current state of the well, and with gas lift, we see our operating condition right there. Now, because this well has gas and oil, we also can create a gas IPR curve for the same well, and we see that we're not liquid loaded. Basically, the blue outflow curve is solid, which means we're above the critical lift rate, and where it's stashed is liquid loaded. So if we go back and look at all the liquid loading history for this well, the reservoir gas rate is in red, and the critical lift rate is in blue. So we're well above critical, any issues with liquid loading. That's just the reservoir gas. Plus, we've got the gas lift gas on top of that, so there's this extra buffer in place. Basically, we're not liquid loaded. I didn't think so. This is what and by the way, I was going through this well on the course with all the production engineers, so it was a very lively discussion. So if we were to say, okay, if I look at my current case, as far as liquid loading and the dashed versus solid part, we're not liquid loaded with the gas lift, but if we turn gas lift off, we would still be unloaded. So we're just trying to validate the fact that we're not going to liquid load the well if we turn the gas lift off. So what if there's a way for us to predict what that oil rate would be at different gas lift rates? And this is an idea Devin put into our heads last year, this idea of a gas lift curve. So why do we do gas lift? Well, it's to lower the bottom hole flowing pressure, try to reduce the hydrostatic gradient in the well bore. So if we have no gas lift, we may have a very high bottom hole flowing pressure. As we inject a little bit more gas lift, hopefully we'll lower the bottom hole pressure, a little more gas lift, and we're trying to get to this really low bottom hole pressure with a particular gas lift rate. But if you keep injecting more gas lift, you add friction, and you can increase the bottom hole pressure, and we don't want that. So if you take all these pressure points and you apply them to an IPR curve, you get this green line, which is a prediction of our oil rate at various gas lift rates. And this is kind of our mechanical maximum liquid rate we could get. So the idea is to create this curve for a well based on the IPR, and then compare where we're currently operating, and then that would hopefully tell us if we're leaving any liquid rate on the table and how we would have to change that gas lift rate. So again, this is how it all works in theory. What about the real well that we were looking at? Okay, this is where its current condition is. We are over-injecting. The peak rate says, okay, well, if we lowered our gas lift down a little bit to 220,000, we could improve our rate a little bit, but I want us to look at the scale on the y-axis. I'm zoomed in here a lot. So on the bottom it says 193 barrels of oil, and the top is 194 barrels of oil. So the entire range is 1 barrel of oil, meaning that the line is actually really flat. And if we look at where the line intersects on the y-axis, that's saying what would the liquid rate be if we turn gas lift off. So just to clarify, the x-axis are different gas lift rates. So effectively, this is suggesting if we turn the gas lift off, we should see no change really in our liquid rate. And just to kind of validate this, it's always handy to look at it from the IPR VLP perspective. So this is current operations, and this is if we turn gas lift off. Basically, we should not expect any change in bottom hole pressure, any rate change. So, what do you guys think? We're doing this discussion in a course with all these production engineers. What do you think their reaction was when I threw this idea out of them? Well, it was basically a lot of finger pointing and saying I told you so, we should have turned this off right a long time ago. And they kind of felt validated. So do you think they actually did anything about it? Did they turn the gas lift down? No, they turned it right off. And so once they did that, I was a little bit nervous, because to have your predictions or recommendations applied, I'm an operator, so I'm no risk, you do what you want, right? But so I'm waiting. I didn't even tell Matthias or Mo that they were going to do this until I got some results. So let's see what the well actually did. Okay, so where it says 200 barrels a day, that is when we did the course. And you see the gas lift rate was very high, 700,000 gas injection, and then boom, they turned it off around day 100, 590 right there. So what did the oil rate do? Okay, now I can tell Mo and Matthias. It basically doubled, and then it kind of stabilized after that. Awesome. What about the reservoir gas rate? So before it was about 2.2 million. They turned off gas lift. The reservoir gas rate doubled. Awesome. So, in the short term, that was about a week or so, 1 or 2 weeks after they turned gas lift off. So oil rate went up and it stabilized. Gas rate went up and it seems to be holding. And they had extra lift gas that they could sell in the pipeline as well. So, okay, what about long term? So I think this is as of like yesterday or today. And something funny happened. So I was checking out their well and I'm like, oh, they turned gas lift back on. Uh-oh, why did they do that? And it turns out the field guys saw a temperature drop in the tubing and they said, well, they assumed that must be liquid loading. So they just had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction and turned gas lift back on in the field. And so there's still some back and forth between the production engineers and field guys to keep that gas lift off. But in short, it's a very positive response. And this is just one well, right? So right now the operator is going through all their other wells to see if there's more opportunities that are similar to this. Now, I don't think this is just a one-off case because other courses I've done, I've seen real data that are very similar to this, basically where over-ejecting is occurring. So I think it's just a matter of looking back and finding these opportunities. Now, a bit of a, take the pressure off. Why does this even happen? How does this go ignored? It's often because the initial GOR is very low and gas lift is needed. As the GOR naturally increases over time, that reservoir gas is acting like gas lift gas. And so it's just the fact that we don't go back and look and reevaluate, is gas lift really needed now? So I think this is a huge opportunity. Now, at the moment, you have to go through and look at this one well at a time, but we're working really hard on doing more of a screening process where you can automatically just see which wells, what would the rate response be if you turned off gas lift on all your wells and just report that, if you changed your gas lift injection rate by X. And so we're working on more of a screening tool, so this is easier to do for hundreds of wells at once. Just to review, I'm a bit of an over planner with some things, so my garage, it came together. But with the heater in my garage, I realized I was just wasting my money with the heater running in the spring, in the summer, and the fall. And so by turning it off, I was saving money. So similarly, this operator we looked at, they realized they were over-injecting gas lift. Once they turned it off, those benefits were seen right away. So this is just one well, again, hopefully with hundreds more similar opportunities. So, my point is this, sometimes technology, it's just like the heater, and it's helping us. But if we don't review whether we still need it or not, it can end up costing us instead of helping us. Thank you very much. I'll mention there were two other kind of learnings I've seen in the last year of nodal. One of them is critical lift rates. Turner and Coleman have been around forever, but a lot of people have been telling us that their wells load at a different rate, or if they have soap in their surfactants, they want to modify that. So that's something we're going to be working on as well. And the second thing is just automating the data import. A lot of people you have your data automatically coming into Whitson, and once production engineers see that and they see that the daily bottom-up pressures just exist, they really latch onto it. And just using the flow control balance is something that I've seen more production engineers really enjoying as well.
Hey, Graham, thanks. That was a great presentation. I had another question on the integration with the IPR, the Vogel IPR curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Whitson has a great PVT database, and, I think the traditional Vogel equation just takes into account the bubble point pressure. So I was wondering, do you have the ability to kind of account for a solution gas oil ratio and really kind of tune that curvature of the below bubble point portion of the curve? Because I see that as a really area where you guys specialize and can provide a lot of value on accuracy of your IPR curve, because that's really the most critical piece of this piece of optimization.
Yeah, so I think to repeat what you're saying, with the traditional Vogel equation in a flow curve, you assume a constant GOR. And in fact, that won't be true if you do drop below the bubble point. So is there a way to make more of a multi-phase IPR that could account for that change in GOR at different drawdowns?
Well, Vogel accounts for the change below the bubble point,
yeah.
But to my knowledge, the equation doesn't account for a fluctuating GOR, which we see from our equation of state models that we initialize for all of our wells.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, does it take into account varying GORs as well as varying bubble points?
Yeah, not right now, because it's just a traditional Vogel. I mean, IPRs is such a big discussion because, as we know, IPRs are a snapshot in time. In a year from now, they're going to be totally different for both productivity changes and depletion. So there's a lot of work to be done on IPRs still.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. Quick question on when the gas lift was turned off. Well, did you check what the critical lift rate was required at the time, or was the gas lift started just randomly, or for this well?
Yeah, so the question is like, why was gas lift started in the first place?
Well, why was the gas lift started if it was not needed? Was the critical lift rates?
Yeah.
Because the point I was trying to make is we always notice that when the gas lift is started, it always suppresses our reservoir gas, and as a result, we also see a drop in the oil.
Right.
The question is, if the ops team is willing to wait for it to come back to that natural level, then the oil rates would catch up. But almost always the ops team do not want to lose that oil, so they want to jack up the chokes to match the pre-rates, right? So then it's like fighting the battle of, are you releasing more gas? But in this case, if you're releasing the reservoir gas, if it is below the critical lift rates, then I can understand having the gas lift started. But why was it started in the first place? And naturally, I mean, we always see that if you turn off the gas lift, your oil rates would go up. But if it's a highly volatile, highly shrinkage oil, then you are releasing the gas more. So you got to be careful of that.
I agree. Like, I think gas lift is more useful in low GOR wells where there's a big hydrostatic pressure loss in the wellbore, and they need some help with the gas lift. But at 5,000 scf a barrel initial GOR, this well did not need gas lift. And so why did they? Again, just what we're seeing is the dashed red line is the reservoir gas, and the solid red line is the total gas rate combining injection plus reservoir gas. And I think they just were very over worried about liquid loading in the well, and it was more of an over cautionary step that they took, I think. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Very good. We're actually, so the theme of this session, I don't know if that was mentioned, but let's improve my production, please. So Braden, who's the next one on this in this session, he did a play on this, and his title is Improve My Production, but Economically. Please, with that, Braden.
Thank you. It's a great way to get into the session to say, we'll be talking about nodal, but let's switch to economics very quickly here. So my name is Braden Bone. I work for Apache Corporation, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about something today that when we take our technical work and translate it into economics, how do we kind of share that? How do we look at trade-offs? And is there something known as an optimal? So 3 of the questions that we'll be talking about today that we'll be trying to answer the way we've answered it is there an optimal lease design? Talking about things like well spacing, frac design. Is it a function of only the subsurface, or when we pull into the economics, do we get various answers that would be equally as good, call it from the subsurface, that we're then looking at from an economic perspective? If so, are there things like commodity prices, NRI, cost structure that would cause us to go to a different well spacing or frac design? And then how can we visualize these different trade-offs in the economic sense? So to start off, say you're given a particular lease to design, so you need to come up with a design of the well spacing, the frac size, propose this to management, get funding, and go out and drill this lease. So to run the economics, you're going to have to come up with your oil, gas, water forecasts, or the time curves that we talked about earlier. They're going to be specific to the lateral length, the frac size, the well spacing, so you're going to have to come up with those. Obviously, the capital costs will have to be estimated, commodity prices, operating costs, a lot that go into it. And then it's kind of looking at key economic outputs. At least at Apache, we kind of look at a capital efficiency one and then a value one. So we use profit over investment, the POI, and then NPV, or specifically NPV per 640 acres, as 2 key metrics. So I have those 2 key metrics plotted on the plot on the left. So we're looking at the POI on the y-axis, so that's our capital efficiency, and then the NPV, the dollars per section on the x-axis. One thing I'll note is that I've seen companies use different profitability index ratios. So at Apache, we use the version where A P over I of 1 is an NPV 0, so a break-even case. I see in a lot of other companies though that they use it as the 0 case. So just keep in mind that in this graph, the 1 is that break-even NPV 0 case. So we plot 1 point on there. A lot of work goes into one dot on that graph. If we're presenting this to management on its own, they don't get a lot of decision. They just get to say yeah or nay. So maybe we say, what if we try to give them one more option? So maybe we're looking at a larger frac in this case. What's the change to the production profile from the larger frac? Is it just early time? Is it late time? You're going to have to decide that and put together those type curves, production profiles. You need the cost of that larger frac. We run those through economics. You get another point for your plot. So here we can say, okay, we have 2 points. One is probably optimal here. It has higher NPV or P over I, but why stop there? So what if we're looking at a whole bunch of different frac sizes? So now you can kind of see on this diagram, we have a point on the left-hand side or the left shoulder that's a relatively small frac. Each point is going to a progressively larger frac, scaling fluid and sand, up into a very large frac on the right-hand shoulder. So we can kind of visualize with this plot and say, okay, we seem to see a rollover. There are some options that are better for P over I, some options that are better for NPV. But again, this is specifically just for a certain well spacing. So in this case, it's 4 wells per section spacing. It's kind of how we talk about it in Apache of wells per section. Where's the laser pointer?
That's the one. And
Top one?
no, just a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So if you look at, say, this point in blue here, I can say that you would never pick that option. And I apologize. I'll try to, I'll be able to do it on the other side. So that blue dot there, there's no reason to ever pick that. So you could either generate a higher P over I at the same NPV, so that would be superior, or you could generate a higher NPV at the same P over I. So any of the dots in that kind of cloud, we could actually say are not good options. We could generate better economic outcomes depending on your goals. But that comes back to what are the goals? So now we can say there seems to be a frontier. So that frontier would be best case outcomes between NPV and P over I. But there's no optimum. So at this point, it becomes a business decision. How are we prioritizing NPV versus P over I? If you're prioritizing P over I, you stay up on the curve. If you're pushing to NPV, you go down on the curve. But you would never, ever select an outcome that's not on that black frontier. So it's a pretty interesting visualization. It's been interesting to plot up designs that I would have said I intuitively think is good. Sometimes they're on the frontier, sometimes they're not. And that dynamic changes based on a lot of different things. So if oil and gas price changes, that changes. If the capital cost structure changes, so say if drilling gets cheaper relative to completions, it pushes it to drill more wells. So you see that dynamic of cost come into play. Every area landing zone, different things like that will affect how this looks. Different lateral lengths can actually affect where you go for the optimum. So even if they're the same subsurface wise, you might go to something that you'd say at a 1 mile lease, we would do this well spacing and frac design, and at a longer lease, we would do a different design, including NRI. So the other kind of interesting thing from the technical standpoint when we're doing RTA or anything like that is there a way to push that frontier out? So better technical understanding, better characterization, better technology can allow us to shift that curve out further. When I look at what we've done at Apache, this is a look back all the way back to 2015. All the X's on here denote lease scale results, so not individual wells, but lease averages. All the wells are normalized for cost, so we're not taking the cost of the wells in 2015 if that was particularly expensive. They're all normalized so it's on the same playing field so that we can compare. And then the economics are run with the production profile at the same price file. So it's not saying, well, those wells in 2019 had a kind of crappy that they produced in the $0 oil the following year. So it's as level playing field as we can make it, and just plotting up how our well results have been. The X's are called real data. Those are the real pad results that we brought. The dashed lines are a very artistic representation of mine of what the frontier might have been at the time, but that's just being guessed at from my perspective. But we could say we definitely have been moving out to the right, so perhaps that's due to part to better technology, better designs. that's going to be a part of it. There's also a part where maybe that frontier really did exist back in 2019, and we were just picking points that weren't on the frontier. But we have been able to validate with the 2021 leases that we were able to land on that frontier. And then look at a lot of the technical work that we're working on. And the goal is how can we push that frontier even further out? So those are kind of subject of some things. We think we have some things in the works that we're excited about, but it allows you to kind of take some of the technical learnings, changes in forecast, changes in technology or cost, be able to plot it and actually see improvement or lack of over time. Other part of you is thought on the left, I think, is still 80 or 90% of the story, but if kind of a final piece on how we can get it in terms of Apache, if we can say only the parts on the black frontier are parts that we should choose, how do we choose between them? So what we'll do is we'll start at point A, we'll look out to point B, and we'll say, how much extra capital does it take to go from point A to point B? How much extra NPV did we generate? And then what is that P over I on that incremental capital? And then as we go from point B to point C to point D, we're spending more capital in each step. What's that incremental NPV we're generating? And then that incremental P over I is plotted on the right-hand side. So you may have a really good lease, and you say those first couple of wells that you're going to put on are going to generate really good returns. As you start to add more wells with bigger fracs, you're diminishing returns. What is that incremental capital getting in terms of incremental NPV? And we can stop at a certain cutoff or threshold. It also allows us to look at different projects. So maybe in a certain year, we have a little bit of extra money to spend. Where do we want to spend it between a couple of different areas to get the best bang for buck? Or maybe we're trying to cut back on capital. Where do we use the least incremental NPV for a pullback in capital? So in conclusion, we think that subsurface teams can generate an efficient frontier. So there's lots of different options that we can generate. We still need to generate all those type curves and production profiles. If your understanding of that is off or changes, that changes how those profiles look, and then you'll get to a different case there. But once you can generate that optimum frontier, then it really becomes a management decision as to where you want to go with the trade-offs between NPV and P over I. Interestingly, that frontier changes not just as a function of subsurface constraints like the geology, but also different commodity prices, cost structure, in and out. So it's been interesting for us to see that some of those things that I maybe would have thought of, if you study an area well enough, I can give you a spacing and frac design. There's more to it with the economics that come into that dynamic. We use these plots to help us visualize, communicate those, and then try to continue to push that frontier out and be able to convey that to management. So that's my presentation. I appreciate everyone for listening, and welcome questions, comments, thoughts from anyone.
Hey, Brendan.
Hello.
Hey, Brendan. Thank you for the presentation. Very good. I wanted to ask you on theory, definitely this is what I guess everybody's trying to chase. My question to you is, how do you take this to practical? Because in order to even build the first charge, which is going to be how my completion decision change is going to impact my DPI, which you call P over I, and my NPV, I will need to understand, how my fractures are going to grow, what is going to be the production for every different completion design in every area on the field, under every stress regime, and I can continue to go for every landing, for every development strategy. So this grows exponentially. So how do you visualize getting to here? And what would you recommend that subsurface team to focus on? Because there are as I told you, multiple components into this.
Yeah, it's, getting a way to generate those different alternatives is not easy for sure. There's a couple of different methods. We kind of use a combination of machine learning to try to generate some of these factors, coupled with, once we think we have that frontier, then we'll be looking at more simulations to try to define maybe 3 outcomes that we're looking at. I would say if you're not even generating a couple points could be beneficial, and that's seeing, okay, these are clearly suboptimal. Here's a more optimal one. Is there something around there that we want to consider? So I don't think you necessarily need 100 plots on this point, but if you can, that's great. And trying to come up with ways to get those is valuable for sure. But it's being able to generate these takes a lot of work for each dot, depending on your workflows.
Thank you.
Yep.
So always stole the main question, but you mentioned the machine learning models, and so how do you overcome the limitations of the machine learning models not being able to extend that frontier, right? Are you just basically using the physics-based models and trials to do that, or yeah, because getting to being able to develop those curves is really the key, and the uncertainty involved in them. But maybe talk a little bit more how you extend the frontier to the upper right, or up or right.
Good comment for sure. I would say, yeah, to your point, since the kind of machine learning models are going to be mainly wanting to interpolate, be very hesitant on the extrapolations. I would say for the given well set that you have, you're going to be able to draw that frontier, make sure that you're on the frontier, and I think that is an optimization in the first step. And as I said, before we kind of did this, we had leases that people thought would be optimum. When we plotted them up, they weren't on the frontier, and then you have to kind of look back. But I think given things that we would look at to say, yeah, can we model something? Can we trial something? If this is successful, what is that plot? Okay, this would be pushing that frontier out. That is a spot that we want to explore for sure. So it's the way to kind of try to balance and visualize those aspects and help us show that if this is successful, we could be moving that out to here and think about the value of that type thing.
We talk about this a lot at Devon Energy as well, and I think one of the more compelling conversations we have is actually the assumption of like how much inventory do we really have, or maybe said another way, the largest company in the world is Apple. They make about a 26% rate of return consistently every year, and that gets them to multiple $1 trillion. So I look at your plot and I see that, the worst scenario here, 8 wells per section, that's called 50% rate of return, which is a very, very rare thing in the world out there in the ether. It's really hard to get 50% rate of return on almost any investment. And so if you were to select 5 wells per section and chew through your inventory, you might be looking at a completely different investment after you're done that is far worse than this. So I think there's an argument to be made that actually, if you look at like what's a great return, called the green at 100% rate of return, technically to your frontier, it's inefficient. But if you were to elongate out the frontier on a 10-year, 15-year scale and realize, well, wait a minute, this is a very, very rare thing out there. We're likely not going to have an opportunity like this once we finish this. We might be going into something that's far worse. And I was wondering, how do you grapple with that, or how do you guys think about that? Just inventory quality. What's next after we've gone through, these sensational returns?
Yeah, and it's definitely those terms are used to really actually of trying to balance inventory, life. I'm definitely more of the camp of if we can make more money on the NPV side of things, maybe then you can be buying land or expanding that way. But there is that balance of, are you NPV? Is this including land acquisition costs, or is this when you already own things? There's a lot of different ways you can view it and look at those trade-offs for sure.
Thanks.
I'm going to try to just change the mic. I don't know if that mic is bad or there's something makes people turn like Braden Wader as your new name. And that's not your fault. That's the audio. So we'll try this microphone and see if that works better for everyone. The last part of this presentation on increasing production is related to how you can monitor liquid loading. Graham, he kind of went through what we are going to build next on the gas lift, basically doing something similar for gas lift. I think 3-4 weeks ago, Greg reached out and asked us, can we do this in the software? And I replied, we can build it for you before whitCon if you present. So that was the trade-off. And he said yes, and now we have it there, and he's going to run through, kind of the thought process, why it's important, and show a little demo as well. So with that, Greg.
Okay. Liquid loading, we've already discussed that. Graham kind of unpacked that a little bit. This isn't anything new. This was built a long time ago. I'll show you how we're applying it at Coterra and ultimately harnessing Whitson to do that. But big plug for Whitson. I did not anticipate them being able to spin this out this quickly. So yeah, Matthias said, well, yeah, we'll incorporate this into the tool. but the only caveat is you have to present it. And I said, okay, yeah, sure, thinking surely they couldn't actually get this done in time. And here I am standing up here presenting it. So hats off to the Whitson team for knocking this out. Okay, so on some of our newer producers, you notice the x-axis here is 2024 January. Some of our newer producers, we started noticing this problem in that after 2 or 3 months worth of production, our wells start to load up and have real issues flowing. A lot of this had a lot of folks were thinking this may be due to the lift strategy, or maybe we need to change how we're operating these wells. We took a step back, a handful of production engineers and myself, and took a look at critical rate. And this wouldn't be a nodal presentation without a nodal plot. And so if I take that well and characterize it with an IPR, that's this profile here, pressure on the Y, flow rate on the X. This is the flowing conditions for that well. So you see our intersection point right at around 3100 MCF a day. And critical velocity or critical rate is something that can define how a well is able to freely flow. And so just for anybody who's not familiar with it, I think virtually everybody in this room should be, it's just an equilibrium of forces. And so if I have liquid droplets flowing in a gas medium, like what's displayed here in this image, we're going to have a force of gravity pulling the liquid droplets down. But we also have flow rate fighting against those liquid droplets wanting to fall back into the pipe or the well. And the force balance of the flow rate pushing against the force of gravity is going to give you drag. And anytime that your gravity is less than the force of drag, your well is going to freely flow. Anytime that the force of gravity is greater than the force of drag, you're going to have liquid fall back and you're going to load up your well. And where the force of gravity is equal to the liquid flow rate, you have equilibrium, and that's defined as the critical rate. And so we can take this and we can model it for a whole bunch of pressures, and then we can superimpose it onto our nice IPR plot. And you can see that for our well, we are loaded. So anything to the left of that line going through the center is loaded. And so you can actually, within Whitson, plot this up. So what's displayed here, similar to Graham's slides, is in red the gas flowing rate, and then the kind of blue colored or light colored curve there superimposed on top is your critical rate. And so anywhere where red dips below the critical rate, you're loaded up. And sure enough, you can see that right around the time where those two curves inflect, our well begins to have real issues flowing. And this isn't just one well. We started noticing this on like a whole bunch of them, virtually like 7 or 8 examples that we were able to flesh out really, really quickly by flipping through plots. And so at this point, I reached out to Whitson and I said, man, wouldn't it be really nice if I didn't have to flip through all these plots, and instead I could just have a table of give me rank order from greatest to least wells that are potentially loaded up. And so that was the request. And sure enough, in about 2 weeks' time, Whitson was able to incorporate that into their tool. And so that's what's displayed here. If I go and navigate to the well section there on the far left, and then click on the results tab up on the upper right hand corner. And then within here, you can navigate to a liquid loading table, which is this table here. Displayed up at the top is going to be the time domain that you're interested in aggregating statistics on. And so I might not be interested in just the last day. Maybe I want an average of the last month or the last 10 days or the last week. That little input there allows you to do that. The far right-handed column is going to give you your deltas of what the flowing conditions are for that aggregation time domain against the critical velocities or the critical rates. And then up in the upper right-hand corner, you can also apply filtering criteria. So maybe this isn't applicable for some real oily reservoirs, and all I want to look at is more gassy reservoirs or something like that. I can apply, manual filters to help refine my list and take action on them. I think you can take this to a whole bunch of different next steps. This is really a sandbox of how can I dump out some statistics from Whitson and take engineering action on them, but critical rate is just one of those elements. Graham talked a lot about optimum gas injection rates. And it sure would be nice if we had a tool that would kick out a table of the optimum gas injection rates across all my wells, so that then we can go and take action on those as well. What'd be really nice too is potentially not just a snapshot in time today, but when am I going to cross over my Turner or Coleman or Nagu rates out into the future? So there's a lot of really cool things that you could do with the ability to harness the Whitson toolkit and aggregate statistics in tabular form to then ultimately take action. And I think, Matthias, you added this. This is just a real quick GIF or GIF. I never know how you say it, but this is how you actually access the tool. In the results page, you can flip between the different critical rate types. You can aggregate your statistics differently. If you double click on the columns, that allows you to rank order either from least to greatest or greatest to least, and so on. So a really slick interface that was spun up in a very finite amount of time. So hats off to the Whitson team, and thank you all.
I'm going to start with a kind of lowball question because I think that there's little consensus on that actually on these critical lift correlations to use. I see in your slides you're using a Nagu as like in a lot of the screenshots and also in the screenshot of the dashboard. Have you kind of looked at that at like a broad scale, or has that just been so empirically what you found for the wells you are looking at, or can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, so Nagu, the big difference there is it takes into account some of the deviation in your wells. We're landing tubing pretty close to vertical, and so whether you play with Nagu or Coleman or Turner, they're all pretty similar. I don't see a whole lot of delta in our wells. I think what's probably more intriguing is on certain reservoir types, we see critical rate nail load up, and on other reservoir types, we don't see that. For identical gas to liquid ratios, I think that's probably a bigger quandary that we're still trying to unpack.
Okay, hopefully this sound was hopefully slightly better. We're going to now jump into the last session before we're going to do lunch. We're going to talk about well performance and more. Later after the break, we're going to talk about like RTN and day-to-day equations. We talked about a lot of these things more on the production side already. This session is a little bit more, operationalizing well performance day-to-day. What do like regular engineers do when they monitor, for instance, things like flowback, if you want to do numerical models on a ton of wells at the same time, et cetera. So that session, we're going to start with my very good friend, Samir, from Baytex, and he's going to talk about monitoring flowbacks. And I think there we can also have some interesting maybe discussions after what other people are monitoring during that time. So with that, this guy.
Thanks, Matthias. Hi, my name is Samir Butwala. I work at Baytex Energy, and this presentation is about monitoring flowbacks and hopefully getting some pressure normalized insights, and we're making flowbacks great again. I think everybody here is familiar with flowback sites, can you hear me? Okay. Everybody is pretty familiar with flowback, but just briefly, this is the earliest production period of the well. We tend to get very high frequency data at this time, but we're also flowing through some different equipment where we're handling high fluid rates and potentially sand. So there's some operational constraints here, and we ultimately want to collect rates and pressures so that we can do further analysis and optimize the drawdown early on so we don't damage the well, which is very valuable. So in this context, where does Whitson come in for us? Whitson gives us the ability to get better information on our prior flowbacks and wells in the type well area that we're going to use to optimize our current project. So flowback monitoring, what are we looking at, and why are we even collecting all this stuff? How does it actually help us? So briefly, bottom hole pressure we're going to use to normalize all of our surface rates, which are inadequate in isolation to help us figure out what's happening and how to make sure that we're going to hit our targets. We're going to use the multi-phase flowing material balance, which is going to help us account for or estimate the early time SRV, and it's going to account for multi-phase effects. And then we have a pair of plots, the rate normalized pressure and pressure normalized rates, which are going to do something similar to the multi-phase flowing material balance, but it's focused on the primary phase. and then a ratio time plot that we're going to use to see if we've hit the boundary conditions of the well. So bottom hole pressure is the closest pressure of the perfs, and it's the best signal we have, but we don't tend to get the best data because we don't always have the ability to directly measure it with bottom hole bombs, or for a variety of reasons, cost, it could be extended timing, or risk to operations. So Whitson is providing us a very simple and clear way to calculate bottom hole pressure with their tuned EOS with PVTs that were submitted in the consortium. And for us, this is a huge win because we have not been doing that regularly, and this is really clear and fast for anybody to do. So this bottom hole pressure that we're calculating will give us a lot of information on a type well area when we're flowing back. It initially, right away, gives us the ability to see things like depletion, possible interference, and downhole bridging, or it can even use it to tell that you've got bad gauge data. And then we're obviously going to use it to constrain our chokes, and we're going to try to not make bad decisions that are going to damage our fracture conductivity that we just paid a lot of money for. So this slide here is an example of one of our recent pads that we turned to sales, and the faint gray lines are the type well area, and you can kind of see right away that the wells in blue and red, they're a little bit shallower decline and flatter, and the wells in the background are coming down on their bottom hole pressure a little bit faster, and you can see the choke ramp at the bottom is more aggressive. We try to be more conservative on the chokes because we're trying to make sure that we're not producing a lot of sand, and that just messes up operations too fast. So that's a big deal for us, and the stable rates just help the forecast surface rates to be more stable as well. And you can see that red line, that's the fourth well of that 4-well pad. The original 3 wells were fracked together and flowed, and then the fourth well had some operational issues, and we came back to it a few months later. We'll come back to that briefly. We're still investigating that well. But the bottom hole pressure was lower, so we treated it a little more conservatively so that we didn't damage it and still maintain hit our surface forecasts. Multi-phase flowing multi-material balance is going to give us the earliest time SRV that we can possibly get. And ultimately, you'll see this on the subsequent plot, and essentially it will change over time as you contact more pore volume. You'll see it on the plot as the slope shallows out. But the early time SRV that we're getting out of it is very useful in the type well area because we can look at the job designs that could differ, and we can compare completion designs potentially. And this is very similar, in at least optically, to the typical square root time plot, rate normalized pressure plot, which you'll see, but it's accounting for multi-phase effects. So here's an example of that same 4-well pad, where you can see there's a lot of color going on here, not the greatest choice of color contrast, but if you can see those 2 bottom arrows, those were part of the 4-well pad that had an increased cluster count that we used in contrast to the prior stimulations in the area. And we expected it to uplift the rates, and this kind of was a first line confirmation that the slope is shallower, and we're saying to ourselves the SRV is better than the prior wells for the most part, with the exception of that 4th well, which you can see at the top. So if you can see that middle arrow is the purple dots, and that well was actually bounded on one side with a prior slickwater well. So it's kind of nice to confirm that the bounding effects and the parentology that we're talking about when we design the forecast, we can see that might have been one of the drivers for why that well didn't contact as much SRV as the wells at the bottom. The ARTA plot, or the square root time plot, rate normalized pressure plot, gives a really clear indication of what flow regime you're in. So essentially, the shallower this plot is, the better your flow, the cross-sectional flow area is, and this is the primary phase plot, so it's focused on the oil. And ultimately, the shallower and the longer it is, the better the well we're talking about. And you can see that 4th well on this plot, when we look at just the oil without the multi-phase effects, it doesn't look quite as bad in terms of the slope. Okay, so the inverse of that plot is a pressure normalized rate curve. And I think a lot of people like this plot. I like this plot a lot because it's super easy to see just how well across this type well area, especially when we normalize for lateral length as well, you can see your short-term volume recovery and potentially even long-term recovery. And it makes it very clear that those original 3 wells are they're doing very well. The bottom well, I did kind of clip the x-axis a little bit here. The peak on that 4th well is actually a little bit further to the left. But it makes it clear to us that well, hopefully it met our surface forecast. We will look at it again when we have daily rates to compare, but it gives us a good idea of what happened to that last well and where we expect it to be. Now, last of the diagnostic plots is the ratio plot over time, and this is a very useful plot to tell whether we've hit the boundary of the tank. And we're looking for a rapid change in the GOR, and we're not really seeing that here. We can see the bottom hole trace and the choke trace, and this happens to be super easy to identify if a choke washes out because you're going to see all 3 tracks hopefully line up, and you can immediately call out something that's happening operationally. I would love to sit in Whitson all day. It's like the best software that I use on a daily basis. I love interacting with it. I like to put stuff into it. I don't have enough time to do it, but unfortunately I can't yet. But we get some other pieces of data like H2S, chloride count, sand production per hour, and those are significant drivers in some contexts that could completely alter your drawdown strategy. So this is just a dashboard that we use, which has all those things kind of in a big kludge. We're trying to push this into a SQL table. We're getting it in real time if possible. And ultimately, we can't push this into Whitson, but I've heard other folks even doing this for years now that they're taking the bottom hole pressures they calculate and pull it into their own dashboard. So that's probably somewhere we'll be heading. And then ultimately, I'm tying it all together and saying that it doesn't really matter what my view of the subsurface is as long as we are hitting our surface rates at the end of the day. And so it's all tied back to this plot right here. We're using Whitson and subsurface models and mental models and all that to hopefully make sense of whatever happened at the surface and to explain any deviations from whatever we said was going to happen to get us to sales. We're still doing quite a bit of work. Baytex is my new company, but we were Ranger Resources last year, you may know, and we're currently developing a Power BI app actually to get rid of the ETL that we're using to email spreadsheets in from the field, which inevitably results in a ton of issues with getting the data clean. And then we can get it into Whitson as soon as possible. We also would love to use more downhole gauges and calibrate all these bottom hole pressures that we're calculating. We don't really know that yet, but we're using it a little bit more qualitatively right now. But as we get into more quantitative use, it would be very valuable. Additionally, I'd like to compare the estimates that we could get from the hourly data and compare it with the daily rates and see just how close can we get by just using hourly data, and is that threshold good enough that we could make some decisions and feel good about it early on. And then lastly, using that MFMB workflow would be very useful to test completion designs, I think. So we'll probably test that out. We have plenty of data with 1,000 wells in the Eagle Ford, a lot of places that we can start getting the training wheels moving and figuring out what to do. That's pretty much where I'm at. I just want to thank Whitson. Matthias is great. The whole platform, everybody there is super supportive, and I'm not great with RTA. This is a new workflow. Like, this domain is something I'm learning about as I go along, and Matthias has been fantastic. Our subsurface team, we got 2 members here that joined over the last year, and we're a small team, so everything that we can do that we can get value out of Whitson is going to be super beneficial to us. And I'll just throw a quick shout out to my colleague Brett, who made this presentation not look so completely drab. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing. Matthias threw this snapshot in here for what, in his words, a shameless plug. The comparison plot is something I've used a lot, and I love the whole interface of Whitson, and I've harped on little tiny aspects of the plotting engine, like how the UI scales and all that. He's promised this massive overhaul in the plotting engine, which I'm super anxious to get out of this podium and go sit down and poke around with it. So I'll leave it at that.
Come on, Bill's water. Thank you. Summer, excellent presentation. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I have multiple questions. I'll meet you outside. Sure. So one of the quick question, a lighter one, is of the 4 wells that you showed, the one with the red
sure.
has got the lower pressure, and I also noticed that that had the longest time to get the choke changed.
Right. We were, so I can sort of address that. We're just being more conservative. We knew that there were 3 wells that had depletion around it, and we fracked it a little bit later. So we knew there was a lot more fluid out there. We probably could have been too conservative on it, and we could have opened it up a little bit sooner to get some of that water.
Okay.
But we tend to not try to do that rapidly if possible. If we're meeting our surface expectations, then we don't feel the need to pull it off fast, as long as it's not impacting the value that we're expecting.
So if it is lower pressure and if it took longer to change the choke, it didn't load up?
Well, that's pretty early time, so it's about 13 days of data that you're seeing maximum, I think. Okay. I'm not positive of that. So, no, we haven't had any problems with loading yet, and we'll have a lot of daily data to compare to.
No, I have other questions. I'll catch up with you. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm gonna put some people on the spot here because I know like some companies out there, you guys have flowback monitoring and doing like flowback analysis like this, creating dashboards like this is a part of like your job description essentially. I think Devin almost has that. John from Devin, my good friend, can you just tell what you guys are monitoring? Is it similar type of data like this, or is it like other types of data you like to put in the dashboard, or can you share a little bit on the experiences there? Can you use the mic? Yeah.
I don't know if we're doing anything super special on initial flow period, to be completely honest. So, of course, we're monitoring the pressure, and our multi-phase behavior is really where we spend a lot of our time on the flowback end, because, of course, as we start bringing on condensate wells a lot more and vol oils, that really kind of dominates our energies on interpreting the near-time flowback. So, we'll try to have bottom hole pressure gauges wherever we can, and we want to make sure that we have PVT when we can. Of course, Whitson's great with the virtual PVT. So, really, that's where the focus of our energies are on the early flowback period.
Perfect. Yeah. So, and if someone we had PNR, state RMPs, bottom hole pressures versus time, also convert a lot of the flowback data is measured at separated conditions as well. So you need to convert it with the equation of state and PVT down to stock tank. That's not automatically in the software, but like if there's anything else than what you're seeing there that you're monitoring that's like special, I think a lot of this was kind of like Coterra, a little bit inspired by what they presented last year. I would love to hear from you guys if you guys have something unique you like to look at during flowback that provides value to your day-to-day business.
Yeah, I'll just put it out there that the Coterra plot was heavily influenced this workflow, so just go ahead and plug it.
Yeah, I was going to add to this whole conversation. Is salinity changing very quickly in your field? And if so, how do you account for that affecting your bottom hole pressure?
Well, we have the result. So I definitely don't know the impact on bottom hole pressure, but I will say that we have acreage that spans the up dip side down to the volatile oil. So there's a lot of different fluid conditions, and we're doing wells in the upper Eagle Ford and the lower Eagle Ford. So salinity matters more just qualitatively, seeing if we're puzzled by potential interaction between upper Eagle Ford and lower Eagle Ford. That could be useful to us, but nothing really more than that.
Yeah. Is it on? Yeah. Robert Rother, just a quick question. When you're looking at the A root K plot and you're making your choke changes, are you also monitoring the increase or improvement in the well productivity? So during those choke changes, are you seeing that slope continue to go down and to the right, and using that to quantify when the well is telling you that you no longer need choke changes and come back? Or is that something you all have looked at?
Yeah, we're trying to do that. We're trying to be as good as we can do that alone, but sometimes the data lag and just the ability to execute that, but we are looking at that if possible and trying to make that change only after we've confirmed that we're not already, we haven't already gone north. And so short answer, we're trying to do that, yes.
Okay, so 2 presentations more before lunch. I don't know if you've heard the statistics. I'm sure none of you have been in prison, but if you want to get out of prison and you have this like evaluation just before lunch, you have worse chances of getting it out. So Sebastian, you're kind of one of those guys right now, and he's going to talk about essentially use of hybrid models or simplified numerical models, and doing that for over 2,000 wells in the Bakken. And with that, I'm going to leave the floor to You, my friend?
Thank you. So I guess I'll spend a little bit of time just explaining that I'm presenting this, but I've almost done nothing of this work. It's all like been the team. And so you have the names here. Some of those people are in the room. So I think for follow-up questions, I might point you to those people. And then I'll highlight the fact that we also have kind of technology partners on this. So we've kind of built a prototype, understood what we're good at, and like kind of define a workflow that we liked. And then we're working with others to try and make this happen. And I'll point out these guys in the presentation as I go through the workflow. To set the context, that's a plot of kind of a view of the various reservoir forecasting method that you can use in unconventionals, kind of organized in terms of the various levels of complexity in representation of the physics within these methods in the horizontal axis, and in the vertical axis, a representation for when these, or the range of applicability of these methods from, a single well to all the wells in the basin, both new and existing wells. And we have kind of an overall map. At Hess, I guess, in terms of main reservoir analysis, we do a lot of things, but main reservoir analysis method, we have three that I'll highlight here. For forecasting, we used a data-driven model based on a random forest approach, and that defines kind of what our wells are expected to do, both existing wells and future wells. Really for diagnostics, to really understand what's happening in a DSU, especially when we spend money investing in a lot of data collection in the DSU, we build reservoir simulation models using kind of the highest end workflows that we can find, and that's kind of highlighted there. The problem there is, of course, there's only so many wells that you can represent within that workflow, so you're a little capped there. And we find a lot of use for, in terms of diagnostics, when you have a larger number of wells and maybe less data for numerical RTA. So Whitson is a very solid workflow for us as well. And what we try to do, I guess the journey that we're on is trying to evolve from the point where we are in terms of overall forecasting. I'm not sure if overall forecasting, which is, we call it the individual well forecast. So we're over here right now using machine learning. And we want to move in this direction by staying with a method that's applicable to all the wells in the basin, but start to include more and more physics into the system. And I guess I'll talk maybe quickly. Those are very familiar, so you should all know them very well, but those two are essentially leveraging a combination of numerical simulation and deep learning. And so we have, you saw origin.ai, so this is something that we've been working on for a few years. It's more mature at Hess on the conventional side for large reservoir simulation models, and we're trying to work with them to bring kind of some of this into our unconventionals as well. Okay, so going back to the way that we're currently forecasting today, this is relatively standard. I'm sure a lot of companies are doing this. We take all of the well parameters in our basin, rock properties, fluid properties, drilling completion and spacing, parent information, and we have essentially a random forest model that provides us a forecast for every single well, taking into account a number of attributes that we predefine. It's trained on all the historical data. We're in North Dakota, so a lot of that information is public. And this is how we forecast. It works pretty well on average. On a per well basis, it's a little more uncertain. On a per batch and on a volume of well, it becomes more and more accurate. The challenge that we're facing is it's still relatively limited physics, right? So in terms of, let's say, optimizing a flowback strategy, it's a little hard to have this. Like we don't have pressures at this scale. So there's kind of like limitations to this approach in terms of representing system constraints. Hydraulic multi-phase effects is not that great. Interference is relatively limited. And the challenge as well is explainability. So that method might be able to tell you in a given DSU what my well is expected to produce, but I don't necessarily know why that is. And so I can do statistical analysis, Spearman analysis, or Shapley values, but it's not like deep in insights in terms of what's happening. And it's pretty poor at extrapolating. So when we're looking for in the Bakken these days, there's more and more extended laterals, but there's still not a lot of these to train a model of that scale. ADD wells that we talked about with kind of championed by Craig Cipolla. We have 3 of them in the basin, and so that's really not an adequate approach to forecast these. And then I mentioned reservoir simulation. This is again, using standard big workflows. We use different companies in this and different workflows depending on our focus. But the biggest challenge is the fact that it's slow and expensive. It takes months to build a model, build a geo model, build a geomechanical model, frac model, simulation model, history match the whole thing. It just takes a whole lot of effort. And we can only do this on a few wells, and it's hard to stay consistent from study to study just because of the time frame. The workflows evolve, the data sets are slightly changing. So getting kind of a consistent set of insights based on this approach across all the issues is really challenging. So I guess the idea that we're pursuing, you don't have to tell me if the sound is weird. The idea is that we're pursuing is essentially trying to meet in the middle. And so using a data-driven component to go from these raw parameter and define a very simple physics-based model. And then once we have this very simple physics-based model, just use a regular commercial simulator to go into a forecast. And so in our case, you can think of this as, let's say, a quarter frac model, just the same way as a numerical RTA. The difference is a numerical RTA for existing wells is relatively simple. You build a model, you history match it, you're good to go. The question is, how do you then define a numerical RTA model for a well that doesn't exist yet, that you haven't drilled? And you need that kind of data-driven component in there to essentially build this parametric model, very simple simulation model. So the advantage is it's fast. It takes about, there's variations, but roughly call it 10 seconds to run one of these models. And of course, because it's a simulation model, you can integrate the physics that you want. So multi-phase are naturally integrated in there. If you want to include like a lift model, pressure constraints, anything like this, it's very natural. And because of the fact that it's extremely fast, it's applicable for the whole basin. So we have at least a hope. It's not easy, but we have a hope that we can scale that across the entire basin. One challenge, as kind of going through the process, is how do you then train that data-driven model? Because ultimately you have production data as actuals, and you need to understand how your whole workflow is deviating, and then go back in here and train that model to be delivering adequate simulation models. So in terms of the calibration of the system, you have to use kind of an overall backpropagation method like you would in any data-driven approach. But that first step in the backpropagation is really an automated history match. So you have to convert essentially the discrepancy that you see in between the forecast and the well history through a history match into changes that you need to make to the parameters of your simulation model. Once you essentially have established a set of parameters in your simulation model that are considered history match for all your existing wells, you can then train your data-driven model to have the right forecast of well parameters, if that makes sense. I know this is really fast. And then in the forecast, it's extremely simple, right? You have you now use your data-driven model building engine to create a simulation model, and the simulation becomes trivial. So some of the things there is there's still this data-driven components, but because you're forecasting parameters that are relatively that are much simpler, it is easier to build a accurate model in that space. And what I mean by simpler is instead of forecasting a highly nonlinear, very complex set of forecasts, with multi-phase effects, etc., you're now forecasting things like what's my a squared of k, to make it very simple, right? And then you feed that into a model, but the day-to-day changes in that forecast is all handled by the simulator itself. So what you're asking of the complex data-driven model is a lot simpler. It's kind of a linearized form of the problem. Okay, so where are we with this today? We've first maybe talking about this parametric model in the middle, very simple model. The idea initially came from the research that was done at Texas A&M in terms of diffusers, time of flight, and collapsing complex 3D models into simple 1D model. This is the first prototype that we did, and it worked. We really liked it. The problem was it was pretty confusing to interpret these models. Like you still have in these 1D models, equivalent 1D models, the frac region is the first few cells in the model, and then you have the inner frac region and the inner well region. And looking at the history match properties, it was hard to convert to physical parameters that we understand as engineers. So then we went back to kind of like a more kind of standard model, which is a 2D quarter frac model
compatible with Whitson. And with a few changes, but in both cases, you can see like examples where we have the dotted are the history and the lines are the history match. So those are prototypes that we made, and in both cases, you're able to get kind of an adequate history match for these wells. We explored a few, and by we I mean people in the room. So the initial history match was done by, for example, Carlos Miranda. Like some of the automated history matching was done by Amir Kenny and Judd, who's here. And we explored a number of different approach to automated history matching. So the first one and simplest one was brute force, meaning you go run thousands of these models and you pick the models that are actually calibrated to history. And then things that are a little more structured, pattern search, generative algorithms, particle swarm optimization, and gradient-based optimization using proxies. What we found to be performing the best right now is this particle swarm optimization. And it takes us about 300 runs per well to get a history match from a raw expectation of the parameters to an actual history match for the model. And of course, we compared these automated history matching algorithm to models that were history matched by hand. So we have reservoir simulation engineers like Carlos here. They went through their engineering judgment, like match these wells, and then we run the automated HM and we go compare. And so we ultimately get really good agreement between the two in terms of the parameters that we get out of the system. So what are we working on now? I'll start with this simple element, which is we need to accelerate that workflow. So 10 seconds doesn't seem like a lot of time, but currently with our IWF models, we update the forecast on a weekly basis, and we have, call it, a couple of thousand wells, right? So it means on a weekly basis, we need to history match a couple of thousand wells. If it's 10 seconds per well, it's really time prohibitive. And so we're working on dramatically accelerating the runtime from these 10 seconds using conventional simulation, using some of the physics and formula that I was talking about early on to something like 10 milliseconds, which we know how to do in conventional. The company that we're working with knows how to do in those conventional reservoirs. And so we're trying to bring this into our simple models. And that would bring kind of the automated history matching for a given well from about 1 hour to about 3 seconds. So now we can kind of afford to do these things at scale. For now, this is still a single well model, so interference are not properly represented in these models. We have kind of plans on how to do this. There will be a next version. And something we're excited about is, again, so we have another asset in Hess, which is the Guyana asset that we developed through FPSO. And sometimes we have to go and run an integrated model considering the surface facilities, which is the FPSO, and several fields, and connect everything through this pipe network. And so you have people like Robert Archer that I think is in the room that's like helping the Guyana team like doing these things. And so we know that if we then have a series of simple simulation model on a per well basis, we can also then connect it to an overall integrated network at the surface. And one thing that's special about Hess and the Bakken is we have a midstream component. So it's important for us to have an integrated view of how we're bringing wells online to understand both potential value for upstream and then the value for midstream. And so that's a path to be able to optimize both the development strategy and then the midstream kind of debottlenecking strategy at the same time. I think that'll do it. We're going fast enough. One thing that I'll mention, so we decided for simplicity reason to stick to a 2D quarter frac model as this parametric simulation in the middle. But I mentioned quickly that originally we thought about this as model as potentially a 1D simulation model. And the reason for that is there's probably over a decade now of research at A&M showing how you can go from a complex 3D model to a simple 1D simulation model. So if we convert that to a 1D simulation model, we have the workflow that I showed you.
We also have the ability to synthetically generate example of 3D simulation models that are very complex for example, new well design, extended lateral, ADD wells, refracs, potentially things that we don't have a lot of actual example in the field, and generate through that workflow, this bridge that we have, generate a bunch of synthetic examples to train on. So it's a way to not only just use historical field data to go train the system, but also use data augmented strategy using synthetic models to get us more data. All right, so in conclusion, we're really trying to explore a new way to forecast unconventionals, and our focus there is not just on delivering an answer, but also providing some diagnosis of what's happening behind the forecast, so we're able to better understand what's behind the values of an expected production for a well. The hybrid approach combines kind of a data-driven component to build the model and a physics-based component, which is the actual delivering the forecast. One of the core challenges is the history matching portion of this. And conceptual capability, so it'll be cheap in terms of time and fast enough to run on the entire basin on a weekly basis, and it allows us to then be able to also investigate different operational scenarios, such as what happens if I put a different lift constraints, or I change my flowback strategy, or anything that's happening with constraints at the surface network level. And I think Matthias added an extra slide in there. This is probably for him to talk about, but one of the decisions that we made, and what we really like in terms of collaboration with Whitson, is we, instead of building our own interface for this, we decided to team up with Whitson so that we could generate automatically in our own environment these thousands of models, and then using the API that they already have, being able to push these models on the Whitson platform, which allows us, instead of having to create a whole set of interfaces for our people to review the models, understand them, potentially modify them by hand if they feel like it, we now do the automatic generation internally, push them out to the Whitson platform. Because those models are compatible, they can be seen and modified in the Whitson platform by hand if we feel like it, and we don't have to do any of the work. And so we have a project that's about to get kicked off to improve a little bit the API, to add more features, because we need a little more control in terms of the parameters. And I guess that's going to be available to everyone. So if you guys are interested in doing things like this in the future, through the API improvements, you should be able to do the same as we do. And that's all I have. That's a lot of things covered in a very short amount.
Now, every time we talk about regression and autofits and stuff like this, it's always this, because how many parameters goes into a numerical model? It's if you include all the rel perms and the fracture, the rel perms and the fractures, it's 50, 60, 70, maybe 100 different parameters, and you can't sit there and do knobs on all of them at the same time. Have you guys internally kind of come up with a consensus of these are the 10 most important parameters, and those are the ones we would like to use in that automatic history match type of workflow? Can also comment like Braden and Braden's brother Jordan and I, we in this paper for UTEC, we kind of did a similar exercise. We kind of came down with a few parameters that made sense to focus on. I just wanted to know that you guys have done so much work in this space, if you guys had any thoughts on that piece.
Yeah, we leveraged a lot of the work that was done on those technology projects and all the simulation work that, for example, Carlos Miranda was doing, in terms of the experience that he gained in terms of knowing what parameters to touch and not touch during a history match, using those kind of highly calibrated technology projects. That drives a lot of the decisions there. And we made the decision to keep the model very simple at first, and so keep the parameters to a bare minimum and let the history match fail in some areas, and then add features as necessary, instead of trying to start with a very complex model and then potentially overfit and get confused across the basin. So the plan is evolving carefully the complexity of that simple simulation model, and adding feature only when necessary, because we see that the model is unable to represent physics in a given area of the field, for example. So a lot of the parameters are constrained, and I guess maybe another thing that we, Braden Bowie was here, another thing that we did is the initial, the automated history matching was challenging at first in terms of matching the overall original oil in place. And so one of the things that we did is we implemented the automation of the Bowie plot and kind of that workflow that's in Whitson Plus kind of manually, but we automated it so that we could constrain a little bit the pore volume constraints in the automated history match of the model.
More question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Hey, thanks, Ed. Great presentation. The question, as you add complexity to this, 1D model is kind of hard to capture, say, well-to-well effects, right? And then each parameter base or set of parameters might change as you are analyzing different regions or different production in a multi-mechanistic flow effect. So have you considered adding LSTM models or other techniques to be able to capture different behaviors as the production of the well moves along?
Over time for that data, the hope for now is that because we're defining the input parameters of the simulation model, we don't have to define time-dependent parameters, only kind of static parameters, and all of those time-dependent nonlinearities are handled by the simulator. And we've tested before LSTM models, but I think they were good in the test that we've done, but the challenge is always this explainability. That's a little more challenging than if you have a physics-based model, especially if it's compatible with, something that an engineer can go take a look at and investigate and kind of refine if they need to. And so, yeah, so far, this is kind of what we've been using. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we are short on time as always, but very good. And another applause for Sebastian.
No, very good. The last presentation before we take lunch here in Houston, beautiful, lovely, warm Houston. So we flew in another person from Pittsburgh too. Oh, actually, not you. Do you live in Alabama now, or where do you live? College Station. Well, now you know about the heat, but that's they just pretend they're in Pittsburgh, and then they actually are here close to us. But Jorge is gonna talk about how you operationalize well performance throughout a company like EQT. And with that, I'll just give you the microphone.
So good morning, everyone. So any Simpsons fans around the room? So I feel like the episode when Milhouse shows a horse after Bart showed the laser tag to the audience. So that's me, because the talk that I'm going to do right now is more like a sharing experience with Whitson at EQT. So the title can mislead, but it's more about the experience that we have had along with the API connections. Hopefully you enjoy it. And I apologize because I'm the one holding you from eating, so bear with me. So the outline is more like a background, what was the motivation and what we did with Whitson, overview the workflow, like how do we connect the data sources to the Whitson software, and then also why this matters. Obviously, most of you may have an answer for that, but it's important to mention it, and then some final remarks about it. So a quick background. Most of you may know this, and if you don't, then this could be a quick refresher. So what is an API? When the first time I heard API, I thought American Petroleum Institute. No, that's wrong. And then I have to Google it a little bit, and then when Stack Overflow existed, I get an answer from that. But now with ChatGPT, everything is like there. So an API is an application programming interface. So what is about that? What is the so-called REST API? Is that image over there, like the REST API, where the APIs kind of rest? Actually, the REST API stands for representational state transfer, which means that it is how to connect. So it's think like a gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper does allow you to go into the data source or go into the software, or as any other analogies as I read, think as the waiter as the API, and then the data source will be the kitchen, and then the software will be the final outcome, right? The food or whatever you're thinking of. Hopefully that makes sense, and I'm not confusing you. So why is important? Because API allows us to have security and control. What does that mean in terms of data? So as many of you knew and learned about the presentation, most of us cannot share as we would like to share the data because of obvious reasons, right? But that security control can be led by the API. So the API allows you to have that in our own system, so we don't have that leak in the data source when using all SQL scripts and all of that. So we are controlling that with the API. Scalability and flexibility, that means that even though someone like us in EQT or Whitson does something in the end, it does not affect the other end. So that's awesome. The other part is like the ease of integration. So imagine that you have like a connector and then you just do the outlet and the inlet there. So that's it. You don't have to do anything else, just wait for data to come in. And performance and efficiency is also important because we upload thousands of wells at EQT. So we want to make sure everything is easy and kind of efficient. And then versioning updates. I'm not complaining, so bear with me, Matthias, and the whole team of Whitson. But sometimes when Whitson does an update, it impacts the batch load that we do. So imagine that we batch, 5,000 records. When they do an update, and I think this was previous time now, it impacts us. So the script, we're on kind of detects an issue, so we have to lower the batch. But in that end, I have a conclusion to share, so bear with me. The overview of the workflow is pretty simple. So we have a data source, we have 4 different scripts, and then the final input will be Whitson. So how does that work? So imagine that the blue kind of circle there is the well list or the well header that you see in Whitson. So we have 4 different scripts that we host using SQL integration, and also we host using PositConnect, which was the former RStudio. So using a lot of BI support with business intelligence department and our own kind of lead on the data that we need, we create an R script that hosts that kind of leading from the data source to the Whitson output. So that updates like daily. So that's pretty efficient. And then the production, we have that production in terms of like we update every 5 days. So imagine that you have 2 tables and then you do an anti-join. I'm not sure how it's called in Python, but in R it's anti-join. So essentially you just compare the 2 tables, and if there's new data, it will update the new well. So you don't have to load again the whole data, just like in the old SQL scripts. And then I just added the screenshot that the business intelligence department allowed me to share, which is that one that you see there. Is the integration API that we have in our end. I think that's us. So you see that in the middle. Perhaps it's not too big, but I can share it to you. There's one called ad hoc. That ad hoc, what it does is like whenever we have new data, or even we don't find the data because something happened to that well, working interest, whatever you can think of, we have another ad hoc kind of API connection that will delete that well immediately. So it's more like we don't have to think on, we have a new data integration, or we have a new acquisition, or whatever you think of data integration issues. It's very easy to solve it using the API connections. And then there's a meme there, I don't know how to call it, but essentially it's like sometimes I go and try to change the code in BI and they tell me, don't do that again, just leave it alone. Just want to share that experience to you guys. How does the well list header serve? So it's essentially you do either create a new well or you just update a well. So if something happens, like let's say we are interested in public data and we want to update that in Whitson, and we don't have enough data, obviously, but we learn from, a paper or whatever, we can integrate that easily doing the update script. Or if it's a new well from our side that we are developing, or a new area or whatever, we have the data, so we create that well, so we have it ready in Whitson as the well list. And as production, it's quite another experience, because for production, we had to do a manual input, and I know manual is a no-no for automation, but the reason we did manual was because we had a ton of data, and doing it with this API connection at first, I remember talking with Jason and Marcus at that time. We were spending a lot of time kind of creating that connection. So we said, okay, why don't we try giving you batches of production? And I believe, and I suspect that, I'm not saying they did that, but Whitson manually uploaded. That's a suspect. I'm not stating anything. They will know better. I forgot to mention, I want to give a shout out to Marcus, because he's very responsive to any issues that we have. And I'm fortunate to know now that if we do a request, Whitson will say, okay, we can do it, or we can work with you. And honestly, I haven't done many requests, but I have a list, like a Santa Claus list. So I'll bring it to you guys, and it's like a programming like this. Just bear with me. And finally, why this matters? As you can see here, two plots that you guys are familiar with. I love the feature that you can see everything in the software, right? But what if I want to do my own calculations? What if I want to do my own comparison, like a simple stuff like the derivative that you see there? I have a script that calculates the derivative, and I want to compare if my computation that does an automation in another data source, it's comparable to another set of eyes or another calculation. Equations are the same, but it's always good to have like a validation from a different or independent, kind of in this case, Whitson. So that's the bottom plot that you see there. And I think I've been interacting a lot in terms of derivative discussions with Teja. Not sure if he's around, but yeah, thank you, Teja. And he has been helping me a lot in terms of understanding how Whitson works. And he's always open to know more about the calculations that we perform and how they can improve and enhance, so we can have like a better assessment there. But the overall picture here is like the data can be integrated the opposite way. So we are working right now, I think Baytex also mentioned that we are working also on ways to gather analysis, because Whitson allows you to create different scenarios. So we want to gather all those analysis and compare them like in other dashboards on our internal tools. So we leverage that automation the opposite way. Final remarks before you guys go on it. EQT has developed a structural approach. That means that we are efficient in terms of connecting the dots, if you say so. There is a split workflow, as I mentioned. We focus on the well header and the bottom pressure inputs, as well as the well service. They serve as 4 different scripts, and then they update or create. And then we have the production update, which only updates every 5 days. But it runs daily. So how does that work? So if data has not been uploaded or whatever you think of any issues on data integration, that script kind of efficiently updates the production in our own system. Big shout out, because as I said, I mean, and unfortunately, Whitson is not giving me any kind of bonus or referral program thing, because I have discussed this with many auditors and other operators. I say Whitson is a good tool. It's one of the kind of very friendly and efficient tools that I have worked with, and you learn a lot with their help, because sometimes the help in other softwares is not as transparent as in Whitson. So it's good to know what the equations are behind it. And shout out to the business intelligence team, in case they are seeing me. Hey guys, I don't know if there's a camera or something, but want to give them a shout out, because they have done like 99% of this. I'm just a messenger. So thank you very much.
We're going to take lunch now. Just a couple of comments. He gives a shout out to Marcus, and we have 3 Marcuses in the company. So it's Marcus Blitt in this instance. And we've been very lucky to work with EQT actually very early on, years ago, on the API integration. And, in the beginning, it took a long time to upload data. Now that you guys have thousands and thousands of wells, that even with the API, not like a direct, even Snowflake link, you can really do a lot of wells in one night. So that's awesome. We'll be back here in 1 hour, or let's say 12:45. That's when we'll be back. And then there should be lunch coming in right now, and so around 15 minutes.